Okay, Jim, shall we go ahead? It's 2 after. I don't want to rush it.
I think so. If you're ready to get started, go for it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So good morning. The recording is on, so you may be invited to acknowledge that if you're dialing in. And Jim and Marcy are here in the Louise Roberts room, and perhaps a few more will join us along the way. My name is Jane Heckles, and I'm one of the troop of retired UCC ministers that belong to this church, but I'm here today with my hat on of the Board for Adult Education. And as a board, we plan the adult forums and program that on your behalf, and are always eager to hear suggestions about what you might want to hear. So never hesitate to begin. Welcome, Barbara.
Good morning.
Our topic this morning, and our other leader this morning is Jean Boutillier, one of my neighbors and another member of the church, and he will speak second. Our topic today is how and why the United Church of Christ matters. And the reason we took up this topic is that our church has grown so fast in the last few years that we are thrilled that we have such a diverse membership. And as members, as a diverse membership, some of us come from no church background. Some of us have not been in church in a long time. Some of us have been around the United Church of Christ for a long, long time. But we're a wonderful, as we say, heady mix of folks in our church. Most of us are familiar with our own church, Claremont UCC, and many, especially of the newer members, may not have had any exposure to the other congregations as a part of our denomination. So we want to just give a little overview of that, and then pretty quickly turn to Jean, who's going to talk about the national meeting of our denomination called the General Synod that's coming up next month. Jean and the Board for Mission and Social Action presented a forum with Rizik Aboushar a few weeks ago about the Israel-Palestine resolution that will be on the floor of General Synod. It will also be on the docket of our own congregational meeting next week. And so we want to be sure that you are aware of that, and also that you become familiar with some of the other actions of General Synod that'll be coming up. So I want to begin just with a very brief story about our valiant chair of the Board of Adult Education, Jim. You see him in the middle of the screen right now. I'm going to change the view to gallery view. I don't know, it says we're on gallery view, but there we go. There's better. Here's a little story about Jim. He's a very great leader for our board, and always makes sure that we've got some inspiration about how we do what we do. And at our last meeting, Jim said something that really grabbed my attention. And he said, you know, I've been a member of churches my whole life. I've been around a lot of churches. I've been to divinity school. I've got degrees. I've never been a part of a church that truly is congregationally run. And we all stopped for a moment and thought about that. And there was a lot of nodding around the table. Jim said, you know, I've been to churches that said that they were congregational churches, but they would call a new minister, and when the minister arrived, they'd hand over to the minister the running of the congregation. And there would be a small group of people and the minister who would run the congregation. Here, he said, we're all involved. So Jim, thanks for bringing that to my attention and to our attention, because it is what's distinctive about our Claremont United Church of Christ, and in fact, the wider framework of our denomination. So I want to ask just a question, and that is, what's one thing that you love about Claremont UCC? Folks in the room, Marcy.
How inclusive it is.
How inclusive it is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anything else? I'm looking in the
Progressive values.
progressive values,
Social justice.
social justice. Jan and Roy, I see an open microphone there. Were you going to add or at this point?
We were thinking about it, but we have to come up with an idea.
Lynn said kind and caring members. Roy, I couldn't quite understand what you were saying.
I said we were thinking about it.
Okay, great.
Our diversity.
And diversity, yeah. Well, I ask that because we're like, the church is like the proverbial elephant where people touch different parts of it, right? So our congregation is a pretty big elephant, and we often are touching different parts of it, and we appreciate it for a variety of reasons. And it's terrific, whether you're in fellowship time or in a board meeting or something like that, and you listen, you hear all the different reasons that people found our church, joined our church, participate in the church, and invite their friends to the church. And that's true not only of the Claremont United Church of Christ, but it's also true for folks all over the country. Good morning, Mel. Happy Father's Day. There are almost 5,000 congregations in the United Church of Christ around the country, and they all have their own personality, but each one is organized like ours is. And that is that the congregational method of organization is in place, and the congregation is, if you will, in charge. The congregation is the decision makers. And in all of those congregations around the country, we like to say that the welcome is wide. The welcome in our congregations is wide. So while each of our congregations around the country has their own worship style and history and contemporary work, they share a lot. So when you become a member of Claremont UCC, you also automatically become a member of the denomination known as the United Church of Christ. There are many kinds of Protestant denominations in the United States, and this is one of the older Protestant Reformed denominations. So what's important about our church being a part of the United Church of Christ? I think it's important to know that as people, as members, we are wading in a river, if you will, of history that's full of amazing events that go back to the beginning of the founding of the country and through every important era of American life. And the UCC throughout that has had a tremendous influence, and I can say has changed this country and changed the world. It's changed the voice of American religion from everywhere from the halls of elected leadership to the community outreach in every place. And you can trace all the movements of justice and peace from those early days on until now. We sometimes say that we're a church of firsts. We were the first Protestant church to ordain a woman to ministry in the 1850s, for example. We were one of the first denominations to establish deep relationship and involvement in educational institutions for African Americans before and after the Civil War. And the list goes on and on up until today. So I would say, how do you think our church resembles that trajectory that we've heard, can you think of anything that our church has been involved in that has had that kind of impact in our community? Any events from our congregation? One happened just this spring. There was here in Claremont, there was a very sad tragedy at Claremont High School with the loss of a trans youth at the high school. And a memorial service was held here in this congregation, open to the community, obviously the whole community, as they went through those steps and process of grieving. There just aren't a lot of churches that would reach out in that way. So there's an example that comes to mind. I don't know if you've been to the plaza on the day that the pop-up food bank and trading that goes on for those who are food insecure and housing insecure. But it's another example of how our congregation has a footprint in the community that extends. And then the other thing to remember simply is that all of our members are ministers out in the community in their own way. Each of us finds a way and is called to find a way to be Jesus' hands in the world. So that's a lot about who we are. Now, I want to ask this question: why are we able to do this in the United Church of Christ? Why are we able to be early and do firsts? And it's a very simple answer, I think. That is that we don't have bishops and a top-down denomination where decisions are made by some upper person or upper body, and congregations and members are told what to believe or what they can do or what they can't do and so forth. Because we're congregationally organized, we decide. We decide. So that means that church by church by church, we can take stands on justice issues in our community and those around the world. And we can invite others to do the same thing with us, other congregations. And eventually, at some point, some of those may make it to General Synod, like the Palestine-Israel resolution and the others that Jean will speak about. So just a plug for annual meeting. This coming Sunday, a week from today, will be our congregational meeting. Hi, Ruth. And this is not a boring meeting. If we didn't have congregational meetings, we wouldn't have a congregational church. Every member has a vote in a congregational meeting, and together we decide what our mission footprint is going to be in the coming year. What's that mission footprint going to look like? What are we going to agree to be about together? It's pretty amazing that we make that decision each year. What is our music ministry going to look like? And how's that going to be involved in the community? What's not only the Board for Mission and Social Action, but it really requires our participation and the ability to exercise our opinion and share them. So just a brief overview of
I
the
just
United
gave
Church
a
of
little
Christ.
teaspoon to Charlie this morning, so you may have finished that.
Hey, Jim, you may want to mute.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Barbara? Proust. P-R-U-S-T. Yes. Yep. So, Jean, I want to invite you to pick up the ball and talk about General Synod. But that's just a little overview of what makes us distinctive in our organization as a congregation and as a denomination.
I want to start by saying that Jane said something that I don't consider true, which is that we don't have bishops. Because in the Bible, the early church, bishop didn't yet mean somebody with power over the constituencies. It meant the shepherd of shepherds. It meant the person who kind of guided the flock. Jane, once upon a time, was the minister staffing the regional body of the United Church of Christ in Southern California and Southern Nevada. And as a minister of that body, I considered her my bishop, and I call her Bishop Jane. But it's a bishop with the function of helping people get together without any of the power that we associate with the word bishop. And so, Jane, you're wrong. We do have bishops, and I get to disagree with you because the bishop isn't in charge. Every setting of the United Church of Christ is its own influence. And so we have a national body, and the national body speaks for the national body. It doesn't speak for the churches, it speaks to them. That's enshrined right in the Constitution and bylaws of the United Church of Christ, where there's a very, very clear statement that the various settings at the regional level, at the national level, at the local level, and within the local congregation speak for themselves. So when the Board of Mission and Social Action sends a letter from the Board of Mission and Social Action, it is speaking from the church, it's speaking to the church, it's maybe speaking to the world. It is not speaking for the congregation. It is speaking for the Board of Mission and Social Action. We respect each other's autonomy in that way. And I'm emphasizing that because it has to do with the General Synod. So the General Synod meets every couple of years. It will meet this year, starting July 11th, Sunday, and go for a week to the following Sunday. It will be online completely. It won't be a live meeting. It's never happened that way before. This will be brand new. One of the exciting things, and we are encouraged to be part of it because it's virtual. There are parts of it that are free without cost and will be posted all over the internet. I'm going to talk about the worship services, which will be that way in just a minute. Then there are guest registrations. The guest registration is $100. The congregation here will help anyone who wants to participate and finds the $100 a problem. Just get in touch with the church office. So then those people will participate in meetings that include working on some resolutions of witness, working on some bylaws for the church, mostly on upkeep. The bylaws are not making big changes. They're trying to keep up with the changing times. There will be 50 workshops. There will be a dozen special events for children with packets of material and lessons related to the national church. These workshops, the 50 workshops, will be not only presented live, but they'll also be online and available for the whole rest of the year for everyone who's registered. And there's some amazing stuff included in those workshops. There's going to be 3 major worship services. And these worship services, carefully prepared at this national level, are going to be very carefully crafted and wonderful, like the ones here at our church are. And like the ones that we have here at our church, it will be possible not only to participate at the live streaming time, but also to watch it afterwards anytime you want to. All 3 of the worship services on Sunday the 11th and the following Wednesday and the following Sunday, all of those are led by people who African-American heritage, who are civil rights icons. 2 of them are women. They are outstanding opportunities to hear our denomination at its best, witnessing not only to the love of God, but to how that affects the world around us. And one of them is Ben Chavez, who was one of the Wilmington 10, if you happen to know that history, a very distinguished civil rights leader from who had a very important progressive role in pushing the civil rights movement in the 60s. One of them is a pastor in St. Louis who's been one of the key leaders in the Ferguson issue and is the racial justice coordinator for the United Church of Christ. These are outstanding people who are going to be leading us in worship. Those worship services I highly recommend, and they're coming up in July, early July. There will be 11 resolutions of witness that will be part of the General Synod discussion. And one of them we have selected at this church on Palestine-Israel relations, and we are going to vote whether or not to encourage General Synod to support that resolution. We will do that next Sunday at our annual meeting. There are others which we are not highlighting, but which will be highlighted at General Synod. And I'm going to take 5 minutes to run through those because the very topics raise the kinds of issues that are prominent in the national setting of the United Church of Christ. One which came from the Southern Conference, the southern part of the United States, is advocacy to oppose cash bail bonds, and has theological content and explanation of background. And then the advocacy is very similar to the measure that was on the California ballot to move away from cash bail bond because of the way it victimizes poor people and discriminates. A second one will ban conversion therapy. This was submitted by the Mental Health Network of the United Church of Christ and by the group that sponsors and promotes open and affirming. In addition to opposing conversion therapy, it has some important proclamation that the United Church of Christ should strengthen efforts to reach out to LGBTQ plus neighbors, especially young people, with the message that your identity, your gender expression, your orientation are gifts from God, and that we in the United Church of Christ have your back. A third one is a commitment to gender safety and equity in ministry. It comes from the Central Pacific Conference, and it is dealing with discrimination and harassment within churches, including our own, inequities in how churches deal with people as an employer, the church as an employer, and helps to deal with the issues right now of added threats and the reality of violence that comes to people who speak out on public policy or who are visibly different in terms of minority status or visible Asian American features. And in other ways, it's dealing with the discrimination issues that hit us as a denomination. There's another one that's related to that, and it is a resolution on protecting workers at churches and religious facilities. One of the public policy issues right now facing the nation is a overemphasis on one constitutional value, which is religious freedom, and saying in some circles that that trumps another value, which is not discriminating. So that you have a conflict right now in public policy where if you claim to be religious, the law is increasingly making decisions that allow you to discriminate against your own workforce in any way that you want to. This is pushback against that and proclaiming a different way in which we really prize religious freedom, but we don't want religious freedom to trump this other value of non-discrimination. And so that this issue will be one of the ones that we discussed at General Synod. Becoming a church of contemplatives in action. Here is a resolution which says not either social justice or religious values of spiritual growth, but both and. It says these need to be held together. And so it's a call for social activists to be more contemplative, more interested in spiritual values, a very interesting study that is before them as a resolution. Another one is declaring racism as a public health crisis, submitted by the Council of Health and Human Services Ministries. I live at Pilgrim Place. Pilgrim Place for many years was part of that United Church of Christ Health and Human Services Ministries Council. And so they have language about declaring racism as a public health crisis. Another one is a resolution to recognize the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent. One more way of trying to spread the news in the world that people have rights, all people, including African descended people. So those are some of the major issues that will be part of the General Synod. I've already mentioned it, and so did Jane, that one of them I'm not going to talk about now because we highlighted it in this class 2 weeks ago, and we'll be discussing it, or at least presenting it and voting on it next Sunday at the annual meeting, and that is one proclaiming the path to justice and peace between the Palestinian and Israeli peoples in conflict all these many, many years. So there's also a resolution dealing with Hawaiian issues. There have been many times over the decades that the United Church of Christ has recognized the role that we played in what became settler colonialism in Hawaii and the overthrow of the kingdom. And so this is, again, this comes from Hawaiian congregations seeking to reteach history that got lost and to talk about the rights of Native peoples. There's another one on the rights of nature. And what that is doing is trying to take climate change and put it in a new ethical framework in which the environment, like human life, has rights, and nature is recast as a thou, not as an it, not as a commodity to be exploited. It's a theological and philosophical discussion of a new way to look at climate change. So those are issues before the General Synod. There will also be some work by reporting on the work internationally and nationally, especially, as always, United Church of Christ at the national level has been a leader since it began in interfaith and ecumenical work. Ecumenical meaning in the Greek word for wide world, and it refers to multi-denominations, multi-countries, in which the Christian community tries to overcome its own internal conflicts and works together as the body of Christ. And the interfaith work, obviously, is working towards understanding peace and learning from each other and benefiting from the plurality of world religions. The United Church of Christ is a leader in this movement. Often our leaders are leaders of World Council of Churches and National Council of Churches and other bodies like that. And so that will be one of the themes that will be discussed. So there will also be a lot of little side meetings at the General Synod in which people from the same seminary, people from the same background or interest gather in groups that normally would happen in the hotel breakfast or the hotel supper and will instead be happening online. This is going to be an exciting week and I'm looking forward to it. And I'm very glad that this year the congregation here has a wide open invitation to be part of General Synod, which is one of the ways in which United Church of Christ does ministry. So now I think Jane and I would like to open the discussion for questions, not just about General Synod, but also about our initial question, what on earth is the national setting, and therefore what are all the settings of the United Church of Christ? And so we're open now for a conversation. In a few minutes, that we have until 9:45. We've got about 15 minutes for conversation. So this is an opportunity to ask a question you've always wondered about our denomination, or about what on earth is a denomination. Before, some of you may have gotten online, Jane was talking about the fact that this wonderful congregation, Claremont United Church of Christ, has gathered people who were moved by what this church is doing and who don't necessarily have any background or understanding of this church as a member of a denomination. And so if there's any questions about that topic, now's a good time to do it.
Hi, Mel.
Jane, you want to come stand with me?
Hi, Mel.
Hi, Jane. We sure enjoyed your and Jean's comments. We're so proud to be a part of the UCC. We were in Minnesota before we came to California 20 years ago. And as some of my friends know, I'm a hopeful agnostic and trying to follow Christ's example. But so I'm really not an organizational church kind of guy. But UCC really offers support for people like me who are on a continuing spiritual quest to understand and to keep questioning. And so I'm appreciative of that. I guess one of my questions is, how is the UCC doing? You mentioned 5,000 congregations. How's the health of our church? There's always this question of, is Christianity dying? Is mainline or progressive Christianity dying?
Great questions, Mel. And I want to first make a remark on your comments about spiritual journey and then answer your question, if I may, about the demographics. One of the things that's special about our denomination and our own congregation is that we are not what's called a creedal church. You do not have to ascribe to a particular creed in order to become a member. In fact, when our young people go through the confirmation program, one of the things that they do is that they write their own, what we call statement of faith, that is meant to be one step along the way of the spiritual journey that Mel has talked about that's lifelong. So there's an understanding that we're all growing and changing in the way that we understand the world and our faith and God and the Holy Spirit and Jesus and so forth. And we are all over the map on that. So that's also what allows us to be as diverse as. We have a saying that we in the United Church welcome everyone who welcomes everyone else. So just a word, Mel, about the demographics. As you've read in every newspaper over the last 20 years, membership in Protestant churches has declined in the United States quite a bit during my lifetime. And so our denomination isn't any slower in that decline or any quicker in that decline. We kind of are on pace with that. It does not mean that Christianity is on decline in our country, but it may mean that people are finding their spiritual journey and spiritual community in places other than organized congregations. And that would be a very interesting long conversation about why that might be. What's different in, so at this point in the United Church of Christ, we have just under 5,000 congregations and just over 800,000 members, and about 6,500 clergy, and then another 3,500, I think it is, retired clergy. So those are the kind of demographics about that. And here in our congregation, we have gone through ups and downs in membership, and we are at this point in time enjoying tremendous growth. And the message and the ministry of this congregation in this area, you can see reflected in the faces and the reasons that newer members give to why they've come to Claremont UCC. So we're glad for that. And we are encouraged to grow as a congregation as a result of that, to make sure that our welcome is as wide as we say it is.
I'll say one more thing about membership, and that is a research study, Pew survey showed that about 1 million people in the United States claim affiliation with the United Church of Christ, which is a couple 100,000 more than the membership. That's also true of this congregation. We have participants who aren't members. Of course, every church denomination has members who aren't participants. But we definitely have people, what is membership? You know, membership means different things to different people, but we, where the denominations in this country have thinned out especially, are the mid-sized congregations that can no longer support full-time professional leadership and have to do other strategies using us retired clergy, or using people who are have another full-time job and are doing it on the side. And some of those congregations are not able to adjust to the modern times. Others are thriving, little house churches that have no intention of having full-time professional clergy, but who as a team develop small congregations that are spiritually and social action oriented, aware. And we have a whole bunch of those growing, not declining, in the United Church of Christ. Then we have a few very large, healthy, strong congregations like this one that are growing. Any other questions? If you want to find more about the General Synod, of course, go to General Synod UCC on your Google search. You'll come to a page that's devoted entirely to the Synod, to the list of workshops and worship services. The worship services, if you're going to see them live, are in the evenings, not of the 2 Sundays, the 11th and a week later, and on the Wednesday. But you don't have to see them live. You can see them afterwards, and I strongly encourage people to do that. And they'll be on YouTube, and like this services at UCC Claremont, they'll be wherever you look to find streaming videos.
Well, thank you all for participating both over Zoom today and here. I expect that we will see all of you at the congregational meeting next Sunday, because it's where our church and our denomination makes its decisions and becomes motivated, if you will, for the year ahead. So we really would like to see you there. Jasmine has sent to all of us via email, if you're on the church mailing list, the information about how to participate in the congregational meeting if you prefer to do so from home, or if you're, hi Beth, like Mel and Beth, in beautiful Michigan. Those beautiful, that beautiful ceiling that you see is from their second blessed home. So be sure to consult that. And of course, it will happen, the meeting will happen directly after worship next Sunday for those of us that are here in the sanctuary. You can participate fully either way. So thank you.
When the church next week votes on its budget, it will be voting a share of funds from the budget, which will go to support the regional body of the United Church of Christ and the national setting of the United Church of Christ. So it is a way in which this all comes together. Our congregation supports the things I've been talking about. The national setting is not something way off there, it's us. I think that concludes the session for today, and thank you, Bishop, for presiding for the Adult Education Forum. And again, I'm representing the Board of Mission and Social Action. Take care. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you, Jean. Yeah, this is the first time I've been in the room as well, so for this, so.